Are there any other kinds of entrepreneurs that people might want to actually consider becoming to support some of this systemic change?
Yeah, what I like a lot is, I don't know if people know Alan Mansky from Plan in Vancouver. He was, it's actually one of the greatest social innovators in the world, in my view. He was the person who led the campaign and invented the RSDP for the Disability Savings Plan. Registered, and he did that in less than 2 years. He convinced everybody, and it has helped tens and thousands of people out of poverty throughout Canada. And he makes a distinction between 3 types of innovators or entrepreneurs. So you say, yeah, you have the disruptors, the people that really come with the new ideas and constantly they're try to disrupt the system. But they will not be that effective if, on the other side, there are what he calls receptive innovators, who are the people who work in the system, who are maybe not that disruptive as the disruptors, but who are really good at receiving that and making sure that actually organizations like, for instance, the government, has a receptor capacity to basically take in new ideas. And between the disruptors and the receptors are what he calls bridging innovators. People that, I think, maybe you are bridging innovators, people who work in the hub, for instance, are typically bridging innovators. They are very good at convening people and bringing people together. I think that labs typically are not the disruptors, but the bridging innovators that help to bring people together in the right settings. And all 3 of them are needed to really change systems. And I think that one thing that that really helped me is to think about what kind of innovator am I? Am I the disruptor, like the lone startup that goes out with this really insane idea for a new solution or a new product? Or am I the convener, that maybe I'm not that radical, but my strength is to bring people together? Or basically, do I help organizations to receive new ideas? And I think that all 3 are needed. So think about it.
Very cool. Very cool. One idea that, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Blueprint 2020, it's this revisioning exercise that the Federal Public Service is going through. And one idea that's come up frequently is the idea of having failure reports. And it's something that Engineers Without Borders has pioneered, at least in Canada. Hub did a failure report as part of its first impact reporting activities. So there seems to be a lot of interest in that particular area. And one of the things that you mentioned related to the values of a lab is testing and scaling and prototyping and pivoting. How are those activities reported out? Because maybe there's another organization on the other side of the country that's doing similar work, but how do you see the Solutions Lab's responsibilities for making sure that those experiences are reported?
So it's a good question. So we will publish almost everything that we do. I'll give you an example. We started with this this challenge on young people with disabilities, and the province of Ontario really wanted to basically do a co-production on that. So we formed a team with partly people from government and us to sort of write the challenge brief, which is for us sort of the first understanding of the problem statement. And that became like the most awful bureaucratic document you can ever believe. Like every sentence had to be checked by multiple layers of government. And in the end, we presented it after 2 months to the ADMs, and they said, well, this is like, we already know that. This is as far as the innovation. And we're like, yeah, well, we know. So we basically said, well, shall we just bin it, throw away, and start all over? Fine. Okay. Well, let's do that. But we're publishing the old bad version as well. so people can learn from it. And think, well, this is not how to do it. So I think that is important. I think for governments, actually, it's very difficult. I mean, the relationship between failure and accountability, and to actually admit failure. And I think that one of the values of a lab is, and in my conversations with governments, is basically say, well, look, if we fail, then basically then you can blame me, and I screwed it up. Sorry. If we succeed, I will build a stage for your minister, and then he can stand on it. Fine. Harry Truman, the American president, already said you can achieve everything if you allow others to take the credit. And in that sense, I think as labs, we need to be modest about our results, or we need to share them and build stages for other ones to stand on. But a lot has to do with when you admit failure and learn from them, because I think that's the crucial part. And it's not just about admitting failure, it's about learning from those failures. And how can we create environments where we exactly do that? And that has a lot to do with trust. And sometimes that it can be done by actually being transparent, but sometimes we also need more closed and trusted environments. So one thing that I'm also working on in Toronto, we have a room in the basement of Mars. It's like the most ugliest room in the building, basically. We are planning to hold meetings there with the anonymous innovators. And anonymous innovators basically come there once a month and share their failures in the secrecy and the trusted environment of this basement room that nobody sees. Yeah. And sometimes you need to create that as well for people to open up. Yeah.
Very cool. Is there scotch in that room? You're going to commiserate over...
Yeah, it's not alcoholic anonymous. It's not an AA meeting. It's an AI meeting. So.
Cool. Well, we're going to open it up to questions right now. I'm trying to figure out how this will work best because the light is a little bright, so I can't exactly see people. So maybe if you have a question, just come up to the projector, and I'll pass over the mic, and then we can pass it back to Joeri. There's got to be a question or two in the audience, so feel free to come on up. If not, I have more. Okay. And just introduce yourself and maybe indicate what sector you're part of.
Sure. Hi there, I'm Whitney from CIC and Policy Innovation. And I'm wondering if you can talk to the value of labs within government and external to government, and what the pros and cons are of those two different models.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so the name Public and Social Innovation Lab already says a little bit about that. So there are public innovation labs that are mostly inside government, like Mind Lab in Denmark is a good example of that. And their core strength is basically helping government to redesign public services. So their focus is mostly internal. And then you have social innovation labs that are mostly working at convening stakeholders from across society to work on complex challenges that government cannot solve on their own. And I think that if you're inside government, it's actually very hard to do the second. Because everybody who you then invite into the process, so say the government has its own lab internally, and you invite corporations or foundations into the room to think along with you on possible solutions. They sort of assume that those solutions will be taken up by the government and will be paid and funded by the government. And since the government is controlling the room, they probably are right. Whereas with the Mars Solutions Lab, we are outside government. We are committed to the challenge. We can really be a neutral convener that say, well, how do we solve this? And government has just one seat at the table. And we actually had that conversation with one ministry who asked us to, on one challenge, to convene a session with multiple stakeholders, and they basically wanted to have the end say of who was at the table. And we said, well, then we don't work. We refuse to do that. So we have to also guard our independence in that sense. but then also create a really shared responsibility and take ownership in solutions that come out of the lab. Sometimes you see some overlap or some combinations of that, but that's sort of the two entities. And the choice of having a lab inside government or outside the lab is a really strategic one that you should think good about.